The solicitor's office smelled of old paper and disappointment. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight that managed to pierce the grimy windows, illuminating the stained, threadbare carpet. I sat on a stiff, uncomfortable chair, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. My gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the solicitor's desk. A stern-faced woman, my grandmother, her eyes like chips of obsidian. She'd never wanted me, not really. Not after what happened. As per the terms of Mrs. Blackwood's final will and testament, the solicitor droning on, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. The entirety of her estate, including Blackwood Manor and all its contents, is bequeathed to I, Mr. Dean. The words settled around me heavy and suffocating. Blackwood Manor. The name itself tasted of mildew and forgotten things. I hadn't set foot on that property in 20 years, not since the summer the world tilted. The solicitor cleared his throat, snapping me back to the present. There are, of course, certain stipulations, primarily that I am to take possession within 30 days of this reading. He tapped a thick document with a bony finger, and that I am to reside there at least initially to oversee the property's assessment. Reside there? My stomach churned. The thought of breathing the same air as that house, of walking its creaking floors, sent a tremor through me. But a deeper, more insistent voice, one I'd tried to silence for years, whispered that I had no choice. This was my inheritance, my burden. Understood, I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a blur of gray skies and rain-slicked roads. The further I drove, the tighter my chest became. Each mile marker felt like a step backward in time. The familiar landscape of my childhood, once a source of comfort, now felt alien, tinged with a nascent dread. When I finally turned onto the long, overgrown driveway, the house loomed before me. It was a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight, its gables like jagged teeth, its windows vacant, staring eyes. The iron gates, rusted and twisted, groaned in protest as I pushed them open. It was exactly as I remembered it, only more so. More imposing, more watchful. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with moisture, clinging to my skin like a second layer. I stepped out, my boots sinking slightly into the sodden gravel. The house seemed to exhale, a long, drawn-out sigh that rustled the dying leaves at its base. It felt impossibly heavy as I pushed it open, revealing an interior swallowed by gloom. Something floral, yet unsettlingly sweet, like wilting lilies. My gaze swept over the faded tapestries on the walls, the portraits of long-dead ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every move. It was a mausoleum, a monument to a past I desperately tried to outrun. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, to a narrow servants' corridor that led towards the boiler room. The solicitor had mentioned it was the only area completely sealed off, a self-contained unit. The boiler room, no radio contact, he'd said, his voice oddly flat. No need to worry about that part of the estate's operational systems. They've been inactive for decades. Inactive. The word felt like a lie. I reached the end of the corridor, a heavy, bolted door staring back at me. It was made of thick, iron-banded wood, and a faint, rhythmic dripping sound emanated from behind it. I fumbled with the ancient bolt, my fingers clumsy and stiff. It groaned, protesting its disturbance after years of stillness. Finally, it gave way with a screech that scraped against my nerves. The door swung inward, revealing a cavernous space plunged into an inky blackness that swallowed the meager light from the corridor. The air that rushed out was thick with the smell of oil, coal, dust, and that same cloying sweetness, intensified now, almost overpowering. A low hum, barely perceptible at first, began to vibrate through the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't the steady thrum of machinery, but a discordant, pulsing thrum that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. And then I heard it, distinct above the hum, a faint, childish giggle, muffled and distorted as if coming from a great distance or from somewhere very, very close. What was that sound? The word inactive felt like a lie. The corridor was even darker, the air growing heavier, laced with the metallic tang of rust and something else, something sharp and acrid. My hand brushed against the rough, damp stone of the wall, the chill seeping into my fingertips. I reached the end of the corridor, my knuckles rapping against a thick, iron-banded door. It wasn't locked. This was the boiler room, no radio contact. The air here was thick with the ghosts of heat, a memory of roaring flames now replaced by a cloying dampness that clung to my clothes. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak light that pierced the gloom from a grimy window high on the wall. The hulking silhouette of the boiler dominated the space, a behemoth of rusted metal, its pipes snaking across the floor and walls like skeletal vines. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet. It wasn't the sound of machinery at work. It was something deeper, more resonant, like a trapped breath. I ran a hand over a cool, slick pipe. It felt alive somehow, not with warmth, but with a low thrumming that sent a faint tremor up my arm. My grandmother, a woman of formidable, almost terrifying quietude, had always kept this part of the house locked. She'd said it was dangerous, but her eyes, when she said it, held a different kind of fear, one that flickered and died too quickly to name. Now I understood. The danger wasn't in the mechanics of the boiler, it was in what it contained, or perhaps what it concealed. My flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating forgotten tools, a scattering of brittle, yellowed newspapers, and a workbench coated in a thick layer of grime. On the bench, nestled amongst the debris, was a child's wooden rocking horse. It was small, perfectly sized for a child no older than I was when. No, I pushed the thought away. A sudden creak from the corner of the room made me jump. My breath hitched. I swung the flashlight beam, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was just a loose floorboard disturbed by the shift in air as the door had opened. Still, the sound had unsettled me. This house was a symphony of unsettling noises. The wind moaning through broken panes, the settling of ancient timbers, the drip, drip, drip of unseen water. And now this low hum, this vibrating stillness. It was as if the very foundations of the house exhaled a frigid breath. My boot scuffed against something hard. I bent down, my flashlight beam revealing a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, the leather cracked and dry, the pages brittle and foxed. My grandmother's handwriting, spidery and elegant, filled the first few pages. She wrote of the estate, of its upkeep, of the mundane details of her solitary existence. But as I turned the pages, the entries grew shorter, more fragmented. Then I found it. A single entry dated years ago, just before my parents sent me away. She watches, always watches, the dolls. They gather the child. He sees them too, he must not see. I must protect him, I must lock her away again. Who was she? The dolls, Leela. The name clawed at my throat. I flipped through more pages, searching, desperate. The entries became more erratic, a desperate scrawl of fear. The attic, the locked chest, it is the only way, her laughter. It echoes even now. The attic. I remembered the attic, a place of forbidden exploration sealed by my grandmother's stern pronouncements. My gaze drifted back to the rocking horse. Its vacant eyes seemed to follow me. The hum from the boiler room intensified, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It wasn't just the house settling, it was something else, something waking. I backed away from the workbench, my hand instinctively reaching for the door handle. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. Was it the wind? It felt. Observed. As I made my way back up the decaying staircase, a faint, tinkling melody drifted from somewhere above. It was a music box, a simple, childlike tune. It was a lullaby, but one sung by a voice that was not human. Where was that music coming from, and why did it sound so much like the melody Leela used to hum? The attic. A place I had only ever glimpsed from the bottom of the stairs, a dark maw that seemed to swallow the light. Its vacant eyes seemed to follow me, a silent accusation. I had to go up there. I had to. The attic door was heavy, warped by years of disuse. The wood groaned in protest as I pushed it open, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, thick as a shroud. The air was stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of decay-old paper, dried flowers, something else. Something faintly metallic like old blood. My breath hitched. This was a mistake. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to slam the door shut and pretend I hadn't seen it. But the memory of Leela, a phantom limb ache in my mind, kept me rooted. I stepped onto the landing, the floorboards creaking a mournful symphony beneath my weight. The space was vast, a cavern of forgotten things. Trunks draped in cobwebs like spectral brides stood sentinel. A child's tricycle, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, lay on its side. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and inky, promising more than just darkness. I moved deeper, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of dust. My hands brushed against a moth-eaten tapestry, its once vibrant threads now faded to muted grays and browns. It depicted a pastoral scene, but the figures were distorted, their smiles too wide, their eyes too vacant. A shiver traced its way down my spine. My gaze swept over the jumble of discarded memories. Old photographs, their edges curled and yellowed, lay scattered. I picked one up. A younger version of my grandmother, her face stern and unyielding, stood beside a man I didn't recognize. They were both dressed in formal attire, their expressions unreadable. A strange unease settled over me. It felt wrong, like peering into a private moment I wasn't meant to witness. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the far corner, half hidden by a velvet-draped mannequin, was a small wooden chest. My heart began to thrum against my ribs, a frantic drummer. This was it. I knew it. My fingers trembled as I reached for the latch. The metal clicked open with a sharp, decisive sound that echoed in the stillness. I lifted the lid, bracing myself, and there he was, Leela. Her once vibrant dress, a faded crimson lace, was torn and stained. Her painted smile, however, remained, a grotesque rictus that seemed to mock my fear. She sat propped against a pile of yellowed lace, her little cloth arms resting in her lap. The air around the chest felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. A faint scent, sickly sweet and cloying, emanated from her. It was the smell of decay intensified. The room seemed to tilt. Fragments of memory, sharp and jagged, pierced through the fog in my mind. A child's high-pitched scream, the scraping sound of tiny feet on wooden floors. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My vision blurred, the edges of the room seeming to ripple and distort. I wanted to scream, to throw the chest across the room, to shatter Leela into a million pieces, but my body refused to obey. The doll's remaining eye seemed to bore into me, its gaze impossibly ancient and malevolent. It wasn't just a doll. It was a vessel, a conduit, and it was looking at me, recognizing me. A low hum started, almost imperceptible at first, then growing, a vibration that seemed to emanate from Leela herself. It resonated in my bones, a discordant chord that set my teeth on edge. Was that the rocking horse moving? No, it couldn't be. The metallic tang in the air was stronger now, thick and cloying. My throat felt tight, constricted. I couldn't breathe. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. Leela's fixed smile seemed to widen. Had it? I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the doll, a primal fear seizing me. The attic door seemed miles away. What had my grandmother kept her here for? Why had she hidden her away only to leave her for me? The attic. A chill unrelated to the draft snaking through the decaying house traced a path down my spine. I needed to know. My footsteps echoed on the warped floorboards as I approached the attic door. It was heavy, solid oak, scarred with age and neglect. A thick, rusted padlock secured it. My grandmother had kept it locked always. It felt impossibly heavy. With a shudder, I inserted the key. The tumblers groaned, a reluctant sigh of metal, and then with a sharp click the lock yielded. The air that rushed out was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten things. I pushed the door open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase that ascended into absolute blackness. No light seeped from above. My hand, trembling, reached for the light switch at the base of the stairs. Nothing. The bulbs I knew from the rest of the house were likely long dead. Each creaking step felt like an accusation. The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic thumping in my own chest. The phone's light danced across cobweb-draped trunks, skeletal furniture shrouded in white sheets, and stacks of decaying boxes. It was a graveyard of possessions, and then I saw it. In the center of the room, bathed in the weak glow of my phone, sat Leela. He was perched on a small, intricately carved wooden chair, her porcelain face eerily intact, her painted smile fixed. Her dress, a faded lace confection, was surprisingly clean, as if untouched by the pervasive dust. Her glass eyes, those unsettlingly blue orbs, seemed to gleam, reflecting the light with an unnatural intensity. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. This was impossible. I had packed her away. I had seen her packed away. My fingers tightened around the phone. A faint, discordant melody, like a music box playing out of tune, seemed to emanate from nowhere. It was a lullaby, twisted and warped, a memory I'd tried to bury. My head throbbed. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the phantom tune, the spectral image of the doll. When I opened them, he was still there, but something had changed. Her painted lips seemed to curve into a wider, more knowing smile. The lullaby grew louder, more insistent, a maddening whisper in my ears. I backed away, stumbling over a loose floorboard. I scrambled for the phone, my fingers scrabbling against the gritty floor. The lullaby intensified, now accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It sounded like something small, something light, rocking. My heart hammered against my ribs. I snatched up the phone, its beam finding its target again. Leela was no longer on the chair. He was on the floor, a few feet away, her tiny porcelain hands braced against the wood. And the rocking horse, the one downstairs, the one with the vacant eyes, was swaying gently back and forth, its wooden runners creaking a mournful rhythm. I spun around, my phone beam sweeping the room. No one else. Just the dust motes dancing in the light, the decaying furniture, and the doll. The rocking horse continued its slow, deliberate motion. Leela remained on the floor, her stillness more terrifying than any movement. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a dizzying sensation that made the room spin. Was this real? Was it the dust, the isolation, the stress finally breaking me? I had to get out. I had to get away from this room, from this house. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, backing towards the attic door, my eyes never leaving Leela. Her painted smile seemed to widen in the shifting light. The rocking horse creaked, a sound that was no longer just wood against wood. It was a deliberate, measured beat. As I reached the top of the stairs, my foot caught on the threshold. I pitched forward, catching myself on the doorframe. The lullaby ceased abruptly. The rocking stopped. Then from the absolute blackness above, a single, soft giggle. It was a child's giggle, but it held no innocence. It was sharp, knowing, and utterly, terrifyingly wrong. And was I truly alone in this house, the attic? Not her eyes, just painted eyes, but the feeling persisted, that prickle on my skin. The phantom weight of being watched. I needed to paint. The urge was a physical ache, a gnawing in my gut that no amount of stale coffee or sleepless nights could quell. My studio, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The canvases stared back, blank and accusatory. For weeks, I'd been paralyzed. My hands, usually so sure, felt clumsy, alien. The vibrant colors I'd once commanded seemed muted, sickly. But something had shifted. The memory of the attic, of Leela's painted smile leering from the shadows, had unlocked something. I found myself drawn to the basement, to the damp, metallic tang of the boiler room, no radio contact. The air was thick with the scent of old oil and rust. It was a space I usually avoided, a place of low ceilings and perpetual gloom, but tonight it felt right. The low hum of the ancient boiler was a steady, guttural pulse, a counterpoint to the frantic thrumming in my own chest. I unearthed a forgotten crate of my grandmother's art supplies, not the delicate watercolors or precise charcoals she'd favored, but raw, industrial pigments. Thick, viscous tubes of ochre that smelled of earth and decay, deep, unsettling violets, and a stark blood red that made my breath catch. I found brittle brushes, their bristles splayed and stained, and rough, unprimed canvas scraps. Back in my studio, the paralysis was gone, replaced by a frantic, almost violent energy. My hands moved with a speed and ferocity I hadn't known they possessed. I squeezed the paint directly onto the canvas, smearing it with my bare fingers, the thick, cool texture a shock against my skin. The ochre stained my palms, a grim imitation of dirt. The violet bled into the crimson, creating shades of bruised flesh and dying light. I wasn't painting what I saw. I was painting what I felt. The suffocating weight of the house. The rocking horse appeared first. Not the cheerful, worn toy from my childhood, but a skeletal caricature, its wooden bones splintered, its painted smile stretched into a rictus of silent agony. I used a palette knife to carve the jagged lines, the scraping sound a jarring intrusion into the quiet night. Then the doll, Leela. She wasn't a pretty porcelain figure anymore. I layered the paint thick, trying to capture the warped, unnatural texture of her dress, the way it seemed to absorb and distort the air around it. The images weren't born from conscious thought. They poured out of me a flood of repressed memory and raw emotion. I saw my grandmother's stern face, her disapproval a tangible thing etched into the canvas with harsh, black strokes. My breath came in ragged gasps. My muscles ached, taut and strained. The air in the studio grew heavy, charged with a palpable tension. The hum from the boiler room seemed to seep through the floorboards, a low, menacing drone. I felt a strange dissociation, as if my hands were no longer my own, guided by a force that was both familiar and terrifyingly alien. The smell of turpentine and oil paint mingled with the metallic tang that still clung to my skin from the boiler room. I barely registered the passage of time. My world had shrunk to the confines of this room, to the frantic, desperate act of creation. By dawn, 3 canvases stood before me. They were unlike anything I had ever produced. They were raw, visceral, and deeply disturbing. Another showed a child's hand, small and trembling, reaching for a doll with impossibly long, skeletal fingers. The third was Leela. Not as I remembered her, but as she was, a thing of malevolent intent, her painted eyes burning with an ancient, unholy light. I stepped back, my body trembling, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. They were not just paintings, they were confessions, they were accusations, they were proof. The humming from the boiler room, no radio contact, had stopped. Had it ever really been there? I looked at my hands, stained with paint, and a profound unease settled in my stomach. What had I unleashed onto these canvases? And more importantly, what had these canvases unleashed within me? The attic. A word that had always hung in the air of my grandmother's house like a shroud. Even now, years later, the memory of it prickled my skin. The sheer weight of what might be up there, a forgotten history, a repository of dread. My grandmother's warnings had been absolute, her voice a low rumble that vibrated with a fear I couldn't comprehend as a child. Now, standing before the dusty, warped door, that same primal unease coiled in my gut. I gripped the tarnished brass knob. It was cold, unnaturally so, even in the otherwise stuffy hallway. A faint scent, like dried flowers and something metallic, seeped from the crack beneath the door. I pushed. The wood groaned, a drawn-out lament that echoed in the stillness. Dust motes, thick as snow, swirled in the single shaft of light that pierced the gloom. The attic was vast, a cavernous space under the eaves. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from exposed beams like macabre decorations. Trunks shrouded in sheets stood like silent sentinels. The air was heavy, stagnant, carrying the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten things. My eyes scanned the room, searching. For what, I wasn't sure. A sign, a clue, anything that could explain the suffocating presence that had begun to cling to me since I'd arrived. Then I saw it. In the far corner, half hidden by a moth-eaten tapestry, a small wooden chest. My grandmother's initials, intertwined with a single thorny rose, were etched into the lid. This was it. This felt like the heart of it all. It clicked open with a soft sigh. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and brittle paper, lay Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face unnervingly smooth, her painted eyes wide and vacant. But it was her smile. That same unnerving, fixed smile, as if she knew a secret that would curdle my blood. Beneath her, I found a journal. The leather cover was cracked, the pages brittle and foxed. My grandmother's handwriting, spidery and elegant, filled the pages. I began to read, my breath catching in my throat. The entries spoke of a desperate bargain, a pact made in the shadow of loss, and he had found Leela, not just a doll, but a vessel, a conduit. The doll was imbued with a desperate, hungry spirit, a fragment of something ancient and malevolent. My grandmother believed he could control it, harness its power to mend her broken heart. But the spirit was too strong. The journal detailed the doll's growing influence. My grandmother's entries grew more frantic, her handwriting more erratic. She wrote of Leela's demands, of the sacrifices she required. Small things at first, trinkets then. More. It described a child lost and alone, a child who had stumbled upon Leela's hiding place, a child who had dared to touch her. My own childhood memories, long buried under layers of denial and repression, began to surface. Fragments of a terrifying day. A game of hide-and-seek gone wrong. The creak of the attic door. Leela sitting on a dusty rocking horse, her eyes seeming to follow me. The overwhelming sense of being watched, of being wanted. My grandmother's journal confirmed it. I had been the child. I had found Leela. And my grandmother, in her desperate attempts to appease the spirit, had let it happen. He had watched, paralyzed by fear and a twisted sense of obligation, as the doll's influence seeped into me. The journal ended abruptly, a smear of ink across the final page, as if my grandmother had been interrupted. But the story was clear. Leela wasn't just a doll, he was a predator, and my grandmother had been her unwilling accomplice. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but the silence was no longer empty, it was watchful. Leela, still nestled in the chest, seemed to lean forward. Her painted smile widened, a silent, terrible invitation. The temperature in the attic plummeted. My breath misted in the air. A low hum, like a trapped insect, began to vibrate in my ears. It was Leela. Her power, dormant for so long, was reawakening, and I was trapped with her in the heart of my grandmother's secrets. What had my grandmother done to keep Leela contained for so long? And more importantly, what was Leela going to do now that I had found her? The attic. My grandmother's warnings had been absolute, his voice a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the thick, dusty air of the drawing room. Never, Dean, the attic. It is not for the living. But the attic was no longer the immediate threat. It was the house. The house itself felt like a predator, its ancient timbers groaning, its shadows deepening with a malevolent intent I couldn't quite shake. My fingers, stained with charcoal from a desperate, failed attempt to sketch away the gnawing unease, traced the peeling wallpaper. The floral pattern, once vibrant, now seemed to writhe, the roses contorting into leering faces. I'd tried to leave. God, how I'd tried. The front door, a hulking oak beast, had simply refused to budge. The lock, a solid brass mechanism, had jammed with a sickening crunch. The windows, each pane meticulously crafted, were now fused shut, the wood warped and swollen as if the house itself had swallowed them. I'd hammered, I'd kicked, I'd screamed until my throat was raw. Nothing. My gaze drifted to the grand staircase, its banister slick with an unidentifiable, greasy film. A faint, cloying scent like overripe fruit and something metallic wafted down from the upper floors. It was the smell of decay, of things left too long to fester. Leela, I needed a way out, a different way. The servant's entrance, the cellar, my mind, a frantic hummingbird trapped in a glass jar, flitted from one desperate idea to the next. The cellar. It led to the boiler room, a place I'd only glimpsed on my first, tentative exploration of the house. The key, a heavy iron thing, hung on a nail by the pantry door. I'd seen it countless times, a forgotten artifact in the otherwise meticulously kept, if decaying, kitchen. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the metal cool and unnervingly smooth against my skin. The smell intensified, a thick, suffocating miasma that clung to my lungs. Damp earth, rust, and that sickly sweet perfume. My boots crunched on loose gravel and something else, something soft and yielding. I didn't dare look down. The boiler room. It was vast, cavernous, a cathedral of iron and grime. The colossal boiler itself dominated the space, a sleeping beast of blackened metal, its pipes snaking across the ceiling like skeletal vines. The air was heavy with the scent of old oil and stagnant water. There was no radio, no discernible way to call for help. This was it. My last resort. A soft thud echoed from the far corner of the room. My head snapped up, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a step forward, my gaze sweeping the perimeter. Another thud, closer this time. It sounded like something being dragged. Then I saw it, or rather I felt it. My eyes darted around, searching for the source, for the thing making that sound. A small wooden rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded, began to sway gently in the center of the room. There was no breeze. The floor was still. It rocked faster, a frantic, jerky motion, its empty eyes staring at me. The rocking intensified, the horse's wooden frame creaking in a rhythm that was both hypnotic and terrifying. A faint glow, like phosphorescence, began to emanate from its chipped porcelain eyes. The sweet, cloying scent intensified, making my head swim. Then the heavy iron door to the boiler room slammed shut. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap in the confined space. I spun around, lunging for the handle. It wouldn't budge, locked, sealed. The rocking horse stopped. It was still, too still. And then slowly, impossibly, its head began to turn, its vacant stare fixing directly on me. There was the horse moving on its own, or was it something else, something inside it? The air in the boiler room, no radio contact, was thick with a metallic tang and the ghost of coal dust. It clung to my throat, a dry, rasping souvenir of countless forgotten fires. My knuckles were raw, scraped against the rough brickwork as I'd stumbled down the narrow stairs, the floorboards above me groaning like a dying beast. Every echo seemed to mimic a whisper, a distorted fragment of a child's plea, my own childhood plea. Leela. The name itself felt like a splinter under my fingernail, a constant, festering ache. I'd retreated here to the bowels of this decaying house, because the rest of it was closing in. The peeling wallpaper in the hallways seemed to writhe. The portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched with eyes that followed my every move, and the faint, sweet scent of decay that permeated the upper floors now felt like a suffocating perfume. The doll. He was everywhere and nowhere, a phantom limb of my own fractured memory. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a desperate, cold fury. I clutched the tarnished silver locket, the one my grandmother had always worn, the one she'd given me just before. It felt heavy, a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. Inside, a faded photograph of my mother, her smile, a fragile memory I clung to. My grandmother had said it held a protection. A protection from what? From her? A low hum vibrated through the concrete floor, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the earth. It wasn't the boiler. This was something else, something ancient and predatory. My gaze swept across the dusty machinery, the cobweb-draped pipes, the hulking silhouette of the furnace. There was a stillness here that felt wrong, a pregnant pause before something inevitable. She'd warned me. She'd told me Leela fed on fear, on regret, on the things I'd tried to bury for so long. She'd told me the doll was a conduit, a mirror reflecting the worst parts of ourselves, and she'd told me how to fight back. My fingers traced the intricate engraving on the locket. It was a symbol, a knot of interwoven lines that seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. My grandmother had shown me how to draw it, how to imbue it with intent. It was meant to sever the connection, to break the hold. But could it work on something so deeply embedded, so entwined with my very being? A clatter from above made me jump. A loose pipe, perhaps, or was it her? I imagined her small. Porcelain hands, the chipped paint on her smiling face, the vacant glass eyes that had seen too much or perhaps not enough. The thought sent a shiver not of fear, but of a primal revulsion through me. I would not be a child again, paralyzed by her silent, watchful gaze. I took a deep breath, the stale air filling my lungs. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but it was no longer the sound of panic. It was the sound of defiance. The nursery. The word itself was a cold stone in my gut. The room where it had all begun. I had avoided it, locked it, tried to pretend it didn't exist, but Leela was there, waiting. I stood, my legs feeling heavy, as if the dust of this forgotten place had seeped into my bones. The hum beneath my feet intensified, a low growl that vibrated in my teeth. I looked at the locket, its silver gleaming faintly in the dim light. This was my only weapon, my only hope. But what if the protection was gone? What if the years had eroded its power, leaving me exposed and vulnerable? What if my grandmother in her final days had been clinging to a delusion, a desperate hope that was now as dead as he was? The house seemed to hold its breath. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I could almost feel her, a tangible weight pressing down on me. But I would not yield, not this time. I would walk into that room and I would face her. The ascent was agonizingly slow. Each creaking step was a betrayal, a siren song luring me deeper into the trap. The familiar scent of lavender and dust grew stronger, laced with something else now, something cloying and sweet like rotting flowers. My hand, still clutching the locket, felt clammy and slick. I reached the landing. The door to the nursery stood ajar, a sliver of impenetrable blackness beckoning. They spoke my name, distorted and mocking. They reminded me of every mistake, every failure, every moment of weakness. My resolve wavered. It was a suffocating blanket trying to smother the nascent ember of my courage. I could feel myself shrinking, becoming that small, terrified boy again, trapped in the suffocating embrace of his own fear. But then a flicker. The locket warm against my palm. A memory of my grandmother's determined gaze. I pushed the door open further, the hinges screaming in protest. And there he was, sitting on the dusty rocking horse, her small porcelain face turned towards me. The glass eyes glinted, reflecting the sliver of light that pierced the gloom. She didn't move, she didn't speak. But I felt her watching me, her gaze a physical weight that pressed against my chest. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. The faint, sweet scent of decay was overwhelming now, a suffocating perfume that made me gag. My breath hitched. My heart pounded a frantic, ragged rhythm against my ribs. I raised the locket, my hand shaking violently. The symbol seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. But Leela's smile, it widened. Could this fragile piece of silver truly break the hold he had on me, on this house, on my very sanity? Or was I walking into my final, inescapable trap? The metallic tang in the boiler room, no radio contact, was a familiar, acrid perfume. It coated my tongue, a constant reminder of the chill that had settled deep in my bones the moment I stepped through the mansion's rotting threshold. I could feel the grit of it under my fingernails, a coarse, unwelcome texture against my skin. The air, stagnant and heavy, pressed in on me, muffling the distant groans of the old house. Above, the floorboards creaked, a slow, deliberate rhythm that had been my constant companion for days, a soundtrack to my unraveling. I'd found it tucked away in the deepest recess of the boiler room, no radio contact, behind a rusted access panel that fought me with every inch. The hinges screamed a protest that echoed in the confined space, a sound that felt like it was tearing something inside me. My breath hitched. It was wrapped in a brittle, yellowed shroud, the kind that might have once belonged to a burial garment. The weight of it in my hands was surprisingly substantial, not the light, hollow feel I'd expected. It was dense, as if packed with secrets, with years of accumulated malice. Unwrapping it was like peeling back layers of decay. The fabric crumbled, releasing a faint, cloying scent not of dust, but something else, something sickly sweet, like wilting flowers left too long in a sealed room. The wood of the doll's face was warped, the painted features smeared and indistinct, like a memory struggling to coalesce, but the eyes, those chipped glass eyes, they were still there, glinting with an unnerving, intelligent malice that I remembered with a sickening lurch. Leela. He was smaller than I recalled, a fragile thing against the hulking, ancient machinery of the boiler room, no radio contact. Yet the power radiating from her was palpable, a low hum that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my teeth. It wasn't just a doll, it was a vessel, a conduit for something ancient and deeply, irrevocably wrong. My hands, slick with sweat, tightened their grip on the doll. I had to end this. This gnawing unease, this constant erosion of my sanity had to cease. I remembered the stories the old caretaker used to tell, hushed tales of objects imbued with the lingering essence of their owners, of memories that refused to fade, of grief that curdled into something vengeful. My grandmother, a woman I barely knew, a recluse shrouded in her own peculiar brand of melancholy, had kept this thing. And now it was mine. I raised it, my arms shaking. The chipped glass eyes seemed to bore into me, and for a horrifying instant I saw a flicker of recognition, a twisted, mocking amusement. The impact was surprisingly solid, followed by a sharp, splintering crack. I didn't stop. Again and again I struck, the wood groaning under the assault, the glass eyes shattering with a sound like tiny icicles breaking. Each blow was an exorcism, a desperate attempt to sever the insidious connection that had bound us for so long. Splinters flew, shards of glass skittered across the grimy floor. Finally, with a last ragged gasp, I dropped the ruined thing. A profound silence descended, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I stood there for a long time, the smell of splintered wood and shattered glass mingling with the pervasive metallic tang of the boiler room, no radio contact. My hands were trembling, my body aching from the violence of my own actions. I looked at the scattered remains, a mixture of relief and profound sorrow washing over me. It was over. As I turned to climb the stairs, my gaze fell upon a small, intricately carved wooden button near the shattered remains of Leela's dress. It had been hidden almost invisible amidst the debris. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than my thumbnail, but it glinted with an odd, unnatural luminescence. It was too faint to be sure, too fleeting to grasp, but it was there. Was it truly gone?